Welcome to the Week 7 Slate Breakdown. I'm Jason Gilbo at JGilbo11. With me is Russell Clay at Russell J. Clay. Talking this week, FanDuel DraftKings, main slates. You're a little bit dressed down. You're casual this week. Usually you look like you're a once the Men's Warehouse ad, but this time you're just rocking a
Hold on.
flannel.
You don't think this is like savvy, like fantasy ownership, like type of wear?
You're like a Kirk Cousins fantasy owner at your quarterback, and you're not dressed up as like a
Great
Tom
point.
Brady or
Yeah.
you're a little bit dressed down. That's what it is.
I'm slacking. It's slowly. I'm slowly getting chipped away at. I said on the salary exploitation, I was like Le'Veon Bell, but on the slate breakdown, I'm more like I think Kirk Cousins is very apt for what I am dressed as today. And I also haven't turned my light on, even though the sun's going down. So as you sort of break into quarterbacks or whatever you're going to say, I'm going to go turn on the light.
Yeah. Let's do that. I'm gonna kind of take the wings here. Looking at this week alone, kind of a tale of two sides when you look at FanDuel. Having the Sunday night game compared to DraftKings not having it, we kind of lose out on some options. I think when we look at DK, it's a little bit of a weaker passing game slate. I'm not intrigued with a ton of wide receiver options or even quarterback options. I think there's still a lot to kind of talk about with injuries and guys that are possibly not going to be full health.
I think it's also important to note that I don't have pants on today. So I think that should be a good luck charm for this slate breakdown for us.
That could have been a deadly sight if like the screen was on you as you went off, up to change a
Yep.
lineup.
I had that thought cross my mind but you were talking when I came back, so we're all safe.
Let's hope so. Let's dive into quarterbacks here. As far as top end options, I guess I kind of want to talk about Drew Brees because I feel like the Aaron Rodgers injury affects how this game could possibly go. I've seen people, obviously looking at Brett Hundley and saying, oh, he's capable of kind of keeping this one close or keeping Drew Brees, with the pedal to the metal. But I'm not really buying that.
I think we're starting to see a more nuanced, if that's possible, Drew Brees, where, I mean, for many years we saw he wanted his fantasy points. It was almost like he started himself in fantasy. And, he did always have some of those red zone rushing touchdowns to random players. But for the most part, Brees was hucking. And last week I think was sort of an evolution in him realizing, okay, I'm getting older. I have a decent running game. I have Kamara. Like I have all these pieces. My defense isn't horrific for the first time in probably, honestly, 5 years. And, my team is scoring points and I don't have to air it out. And this is probably the weakest receiving core he's had in probably his entire career. So while I'm always willing to believe there's a Drew Brees game, I'm kind of with you, even though I don't want to be. It's like, this is a classic Drew Brees game, but they might just run.
That's kind of how I'm looking at it. Like I like Kamara, I like Ingram. We'll talk Michael Thomas in a little bit. When you look at things here, he's the most expensive DK quarterback. Is he really worth it? I don't think so. And it's hard to knock a guy who's thrown for 1,300 yards and 10 touchdowns this year. Like he just really hasn't had a huge ceiling. I mean, outside the game against New England, where he had his only 300-yard game. If he's not getting that 300-yard bonus and 2 to 3 touchdowns, he's kind of not worth that price tag.
And like you mentioned with Hundley, at home the Packers might be able to move the ball, but I'd use caution with this matchup. I think you can certainly use Breeze. I love Michael Thomas this week pretty much across the way, only $23 on Yahoo, but I think we do have to be wary. I think, Mark Ingram could finally have, his 225 to 250 carry season that we've been waiting for a long time. And I just think, the short passing game and the dump offs and It's not that high flying passing game like before. So I agree. And then we kind of jump into Prescott, Newton, Mariota, sort of the rushing tandem. Some of them in good matchups. What do you think of Cam against Chicago?
I'm a little worried about Carolina going on the road to Chicago. Chicago at home is always kind of I feel like it's a trap game for some of these offenses that have been playing pretty well. I mean, you look at Newton's success over the last 3 weeks. I mean, the touchdowns have been there, the rushing yards have been there. That's the upside we want out of a quarterback that's in the 7K range. So I like Newton and GPPs. Keep an eye on his health. I know, he's banged up, and I was joking around with you. He's probably always going to be banged up. But I think you can take some shots in tournaments with him. I think that's how I'm going to roll with Newton. I mean, where do you like Newton this week?
I'm not playing him. Again, I saw him take that hit at the end of the game where he kind of was wobbling around. He stayed in the game, but he looked hurt, even more hurt than, what we were worried about the shoulder. So certainly, a Devin Funchess if Kelvin Benjamin doesn't play is someone I'm interested in, but I'm fading Cam against Chicago at home. I think these guys are all priced up. Like, I love Dak. Mariota's got a great matchup, but they're not cheap. They're kind of like, okay, I get why they're expensive, but I'm not in love with any of the plays. Aaron Rodgers obviously out. Wilson always that GPP play, but not someone you ever look at in cash or even want to get a lot of lineups with. And Carson Palmer against this Rams defense that kind of is a really weird defense. Week to week, they give up big plays, but you never know if it's coming in the passing game or the running game. They're springing leaks, and then they like plug them the next week, and then another. You know what I mean? It's like it's always coming from somewhere, but they're plugging different holes. But you know what I mean?
This is the weirdest tier for me. This is probably one of the weirder weeks at quarterback because, You watch Mariota this past week against Indianapolis. It's clear that he wasn't 100%. He was not mobile at all. I know he got a full practice in today. Maybe it's different against Cleveland. He's still priced up quite a bit, like on both sites. I mean, the FanDuel, pricing isn't really all that soft for quarterback this week. We have Matt Ryan, Tom Brady over there. I know Matt Ryan's on your list of never play again, basically. But Tom Brady, I mean, are you willing to go the well? Like, Atlanta, New England should be one of the better fantasy games on the slate. And I think FanDuel quarterbacks, you can go that route. It's kind of, they have that edge over some of the other guys.
I've been firing away with Brady. It worked those first 2 out of those first 3 weeks. Hasn't been working so well the last 2 weeks. This is obviously a matchup where you look like, okay, they should be able to exploit this. And then you get Julio coming around the other end. I know, all the talk this week's been about him not being used right, and I agree. But this is a great play again. And I'm talking like this because I'm a wounded man after last week. I had a lot of Julio. I had a lot of Matt Ryan trying to, GPP my way to some funds. I like Matt Ryan, way too expensive on Yahoo. I don't know. It's an okay play again, just like those other, I like the game, but I'd rather play Brady for sure.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I think Russell Wilson, I like him better on DK because he's kind of out of that price range off of Newton and Mariota a little bit. Seattle in kind of a tricky spot here going on the road. These games are always some sort of a down game for the Seattle. Anytime they go to the East Coast, we've seen it in Wilson's numbers. We've seen it in Baldwin's numbers over the previous 2 years or so. But, I think you look at this Giants defense, they've allowed a couple big games. Obviously, Denver was basically a throw-it spot the most that game, but, still allowed 376 yards to Simeon, allowed 3 touchdowns to Rivers, allowed 3 touchdowns to Winston the week before. They really haven't been that great against quarterbacks this year. It's been kind of a different team where the secondary was really still supposed to be a strong suit. So I think there's enough weapons there for them to take advantage of it. It's pretty clear Seattle can't run the ball. I'm kind of more into CJ Prosise is back this week. He's a nice weapon for Wilson. So I kind of think Wilson's gonna sneak into my lives maybe more than he should this week.
More than he should. Exactly right. That's usually what happens. And then he gets 13 points and you're like, oh, all right. This was great. I'm glad I did that. Josh McCown, obviously in play again against Miami. They don't give up a ton of big plays, but McCown's, $21 on Yahoo, 50, 52 on DK. He's just so cheap every week, and they're moving the ball. They have nice receiving backs. They got, ASJ, who's been a revelation, totally rebirthed his career. And this shouldn't be a surprise for people that know about his, college production and his draft position and his athletic profile. Like this is who he is. So I'm not afraid to play him again, even at increased prices. And Robbie Anderson, Curse seem to be good GPP darts. So yeah, I'm going with him again.
I like McCown. I think he's a viable cheap option this week in consideration to where these other guys' prices and matchups are. 7K on FanDuel, I think that's viable. Carson Palmer's also 7K. I don't get the Tyrod love this week. I just don't think there's anyone really to throw to. No Jordan Matthews, not that they were really using him that much. No Charles Clay. I think for me, it's McCoy, and that's all I'm touching from this Buffalo offense. So I think when you look at it, I think McCown makes the most sense out of there. And I don't know how you feel about using Hundley. I think some people will. Sure, I'm okay with it. Maybe I'll take a few Hundley shots, but he's not a favorite core play of mine.
Yeah, I'll take a shot. He has that rushing upside. He has great weapons. So yeah, I'll take a shot with him. I see some people using him as a core, like you mentioned, or CJ Beathard. I'm okay with him as a play as well, but it's not something I'm in love with. Rookie quarterbacks coming into their second game. Maybe teams have a little film on them now. I don't know. Well, we'll see. But I'd much rather trust McCown as the safer option if you want to pay down.
Yeah, no, I'm in agreement. Anyone else you really want to name here?
No, Trubisky is a guy that I think we're going to get to play against the Saints in a few weeks, but he's just had a string of really tough matchups to start his career here.
Yeah, no agreement there. Let's move on to running backs. Basically a full slate of really good running backs this week in good spots. Pittsburgh, has really obviously shined when Bell has went out there and done some damage. He's been the guy in these kind of slug it out games outside the Jacksonville game. It's weird, the touches have varied basically week in and week out, where he's had a heavy usage and then goes back to not being used, has a heavy usage, goes back to not being used. And if that's a trend, this week he's not being used.
Well, let's start out by saying I think McCoy Freeman on FanDuel has a good chance at being the nuts. McCoy obviously hasn't done much this year in terms of touchdowns, and this has a low yards per carry. We talked about it a few weeks ago. Maybe it's the beginning of the end for him. But he's relatively cheap. They don't have anything else. Tampa Bay is a joke defensively. So certainly a ton of upside there, and you're getting that cheap discount because of that lack of production. I'm pretty much all in there. He's my top play with price considered. And Freeman, we were joking before the pod, this is one of those games where Freeman gets that 20-yard rush, with 11 minutes left in the first quarter, and you just know, especially if you didn't play him, oh yeah, this is gonna be ugly for me.
I like that. I like McCoy a lot this week. I like that tier 2 of kind of guys. Devontae Freeman. You look at New England; they've been awful against the rush this year. 23rd in DVOA. Against pass catching backs, they've struggled as well. 28th in DVOA. So I think Freeman obviously fits that bill. I think they're going to be able to move the ball. Like I said, I think Julio Jones, Freeman are good plays. This week, I don't think I don't want the Matt Ryan exposure. I don't really want any of the secondary exposure. I think I'm just going to go with their main weapons, and Freeman's certainly one of them because, below 8K for him and McCoy, I think that's nice given the fact that, you really are paying premium dollars for Bell, Fournette, Zeke this week, and I don't mind Gurley and GPPs either.
Yeah, it's really hard to pick week to week. I think Le'Veon is not an easy fade for me on FanDuel. I just think with the $2,000 difference between him and Freeman, that just makes it kind of easy for me. But like you mentioned in tournaments, Zeke's a cash game play as far as I'm concerned. I think he's got as good of a chance as being the RB1 on this slate as much as anyone. But like Leonard Fournette's really the big problem I'm having this week because I don't know how healthy he's going to be. I don't know what they're going to do with his snaps. It's a really volatile play, but at any moment he can break that 70-yard touchdown. And, Indy's been okay against the run this year. They've actually been pretty decent, but Fournette could make them look bad, if he's healthy. So what's your take there on Fournette?
I love Fournette because I don't think this Colts defense is very good.
Yeah.
I think when you look at things, obviously they've allowed a couple of big plays. Obviously the Derrick Henry, DeMarco Murray game. I think after that things kind of got a little heightened when you look at what they've allowed to running backs this year. Because for the most part, like you said, they haven't been bad against them. They held Gurley to a pretty inefficient game. They haven't allowed a 100-yard runner outside of Derrick Henry yet this season, but they keep kind of giving up these short touchdowns. And we kind of saw some weird games. We saw the Seattle game where they had a couple of defensive touchdowns, but some of those guys had some success running the ball. So I like him in this spot. Like you said, I think health-wise is always the biggest concern. It seems like he's going to be okay. I like him a lot. Once again, he's expensive. He's kind of earned that price tag of where he's at in terms of touches and red zone usage. So I'm okay with him. I think for the most part, I'm going to be sticking with that lower tier of like McCoy and Freeman, and then just kind of making pivots to using, Bell and Zeke. And still, I feel like when you look at FanDuel, there's another tier that we can kind of continue to go down. Same thing with DraftKings of, Mark Ingram, Jerick McKinnon, Jay Ajayi, these types of guys, because they're in good spots too. Christian McCaffrey's another one I don't mind.
Well, one other note on the Colts, obviously the setback for Andrew Luck, not practicing anymore, looking like he's probably headed to IR. It's only a matter of time before the floodgates open for this Colts team and they just start getting blown out every game. I think a lot of the players were under the assumption that Luck was coming back and they only had to hold down the fort. That's what this felt like to me. I've watched quite a few Colts games and they've been playing well, but after how many weeks, before the wheels start to fall off on Brissett, with teams getting film on him, teams starting to weigh on this defense, the floodgates are going to start to open and they're going to start to get blown out, I think, pretty soon here.
We saw that in the second half. Defense, that offense couldn't stay on the field, and Derrick Henry and DeMarco Murray just ran an absolute muck on that defense. So we're going to start to see, I think, more of that as we go down the stretch here. I'm with you.
With Luke Kuechly out, I think Jordan Howard's definitely in play. He's certainly the straw that stirs the drink in terms of Carolina, pretty much everything on defense. So something to watch there. I think they'll still be fine, though. McKinnon, another good matchup. I'm not against it. I probably won't be getting a ton of exposure on FanDuel, but, DK always has that receiving upside, even if he kind of doesn't get off, to the big runs he had the last few weeks. Mark Ingram, I'm not in love with this week personally.
Yeah, you have a little bit of a gripe of picking running backs against Green Bay, I feel. Like you got to go down on them. I don't know what it is, but I think Ingram, in the real world, if we got, smart coaches making smart plays, Mark Ingram is the type of talent that you get him 25 touches every game. And I feel like last game was the perfect game script for him to just go off and do that type of stuff. And, but when we really look at things, he's kind of been a guy that he's been productive with what he's had. And now when we look at these increased usage, I think you have to consider him still as an RB2. with these prices, I don't feel like they're really priced up enough for what his potential is. And Green Bay, probably an average rush defense. They've actually been allowing quite a bit of fantasy points. They're bottom 10 in fantasy points allowed to running backs. So, like, I'm okay with Kamara and GPPs. I like Ingram and Cash. I'm okay going back to the well here.
Well, let's break it down. So Zeke had over 100 yards, like 29 carries for 115 yards. Like, that's not very good. Jordan Howard had 18 carries for 53 yards, right? McKinnon played well last week. Joe Mixon had like 15 carries for 30 yards. I mean, I don't know. Freeman had a decent running game. He got those rushing touchdowns, but he didn't have a huge game, 19 for 84 yards. The Packers can hold it down. They're not great, but they're not someone I target either.
I look in kind of like the Saints offensive line is really good. And, I think with Green Bay, they're banged up. New Orleans is just going to basically be able to keep them on their toes. They're not going to be able to load the box because that secondary is basically practice squad guys right now. And, I think that's one thing to note with Breeze if you do want to take a shot, but like they're just not going to be able to load the box and they got to keep them honest. And I just think that really bodes well for Ingram because like you said, I mean, there hasn't been a ton of huge games. Zeke, it took him a while to get there and he didn't get the touchdown. Jerick McKinnon was, by far one of the bigger plays this week. And then you look at Freeman. But outside of that, I mean, they played Seattle. There really wasn't anything there. Cincinnati, there really wasn't anything there. Chicago, I mean, that was a bad game script for basically everyone, with Jordan Howard, but he still got the touchdown. I don't know. I just feel like they're more average. I do feel like you can target them.
And if DeMarco Murray does sit, I'm playing Derrick Henry just because he's going to get 20 to 25 touches. So relatively cheap on FanDuel, 5,600. So kind of what you're looking for. If Murray sits, he'd be pretty low ownership with all the good running back options this week.
I agree. I mean, look, we can talk about the next tier here because, like, Adrian Peterson, are you buying what he brought to the table? I mean, it certainly popped off an Arizona offense, and it seemed like it kind of uncapped Palmer and his efficiency because when you look at things, I mean, he really unlocked the door for that passing game to really start working.
Was it them or was it the Buccaneers being really bad?
They've been bad for sure. They've definitely been bad. But I mean, Rams, rush defense hasn't been great either this year.
Yeah, I just wonder if it was a combination of things, not just Peterson being the skeleton key or whatever they say that saying is. So certainly viable. Great matchup for him. I like the play, especially on DK 5,800. So yeah, I'm for it. I'm in. I'm not going to be all in, but I'm down. Yeah.
I mean, 6,300 on FanDuel too. Like he's cheap. I mean, there's a couple cheap guys. Like I don't like you said, Derrick Henry 5,600.
I think you can play Frank Gore this week, 4,100 against that Jacksonville run D. I think he can get you 15 for sure.
I don't mind him if you're kind of going like a different route. Like, if you're trying to get some of those bigger wide receivers. What are your thoughts on McCaffrey DK wise? I still won't go to him on FanDuel. He's just basically solely a DK play. 61, I feel like that's a little bit priced up. Targets continue to be there.
I don't think you have to this week. I think in previous weeks he was. I don't think you need him this week as much.
No, I think he's more just a tournament shot. I mean, he's not a guy that I'm really looking to plug and play.
Right.
So, because I mean, really DK, I mean, it's pretty limited. There's no real guy below 5,500 outside of Henry, who is 5,500 that I feel I need to go to.
For sure. So,
I think that's it for running backs for me. I'm not on Carlos Hyde. People might be looking to go him after 2 touchdowns. I'm not trusting him in any format, but if you want to, fine. Does that sum it up?
That sums it up. That's perfect. I might throw a lineup in there though. I always want to have like one Carlos Hyde lineup. Like
that's fair.
out of like 15, I kind of want to have one in there. But yeah, it's a really sketchy situation with Shanahan.
Yeah. Can I talk JHI just real quick before we break into wide receiver?
Sure.
People are going to be off. People are going to not want to play him. He's 6,200. He's around these other guys. He needs the touchdown. He really does. If anything, I mean, I like the 25 touches in each of the last 2 weeks. I'm not, huge against the Jets defense. I don't think they're bad. I don't think they're good. But a whole matchup here, I mean, if they can give him 20 touches, 25 touches, I'm going to have a share or two. I know you don't like it, but that's fine. Shake your head.
Yeah, I don't like that. No, that makes me really uncomfortable. Anyway, on to receivers. I get your take. I'm just not there with you.
Go to hell. Let's look at wide receivers. Top end options this week. Antonio Brown taking on Cincinnati. Brown's just been a huge producer basically out of 2 weeks this season where he hasn't done much. 700 yards, 2 touchdowns. He's getting those targets. Cincinnati's a pretty good defense still. They tend to usually try and take away Brown for the most part in their matches. You can try. Once again, I don't find him to be a must play, but I mean, he's a guy that I still feel the need to get exposure to in some lineups.
I'm not playing him this week. I get why, and I certainly think he's pretty much matchup proof at this stage. I just like the running backs better for this week. But I'm not going to knock it if you play it. Again, you get that different lineup construction with him in, and it obviously worked last week in terms of shifting up what you're doing compared to everyone else. So I'm not going to knock paying up receivers. I just would rather do Dez. I think Dez outscores him this week, at a cheaper price. So that's kind of where I'm going.
That's a bold call, sir. That's a bold call. Yeah, Dez outscoring Brown. I mean, like Dez isn't a huge target guy. I mean, yeah, he's had a couple big games, but like he hasn't crossed over 100 yards yet this season.
Well, consider me freaking Russ Bayless then, because I'm all in.
Dez hasn't even he's crossed over 60 receiving yards once this year, but he did have a brutal stretch of games. I'll say that.
We got a good matchup here. They're going to be moving the ball. It's one of the few good matchups for the top end receivers this week. So I'm in. And I think, we talked about Michael Thomas, which I'm also really in on this week. And you sort of have some hesitance. I'm talking about maybe going, all in, and you're kind of being like, hey, Russ, let's relax. And I'm kind of like, yeah, maybe you're right, but I'll probably go all in anyway. So let's talk about it. Michael Thomas, sort of that 70 to 90 receiving yards. You need that touchdown to play him at his prices basically this year. You're not all in. You just think it's a good play.
Yeah, I'm kind of lukewarm on the play. Like he's a guy I can see plugging him in. I don't think 77 is that bad on FanDuel. 75 on DK. With the lineup construction and not being able to plug as many bigger guys into a lineup, I think he's a little bit iffy for me there. A great matchup for him. I mean, a banged up Green Bay secondary. They struggle against wide receiver ones. They're in 22nd. So, like, I can see the play. I am hesitant. I don't, like you said, I don't think my lineup construction is really going to take me to a lot of these guys. But I don't mind it. But you're talking, I mean, Yahoo, he's like,
$23 on Yahoo. I really like him on FanDuel as well. I think he's a really solid touchdown chance this week. So he still is the main weapon in that offense. But I think it really has a lot to do with the tier he's around. I like Fitzgerald, but like Hilton, Baldwin, Nelson, without Rodgers, Demarius is questionable. Stephon Diggs might not play. Keenan Allen against Denver. It's just like, I don't want to touch any of that, There's
a lot of bad matchups this week. Like, God, I mean, Julio Jones was getting, 10 targets a game and getting red zone looks. We'd just be all over him this week on FanDuel as a guy we try to build around, but that's not the case. I still like him. I still think the upside's huge there. I think obviously on DK things, like you said, it's a little bit ugly without those receivers from that game. You don't get Brandon Cooks there. You don't get Chris Hogan, who's been playing really well. It's kind of disappointing. But yeah, like you said, I mean, Hilton in a tough matchup against Jacksonville's corners, Mike Evans in a tough spot on the road against Buffalo with possibly Ryan Fitzpatrick under center if Winston's not healthy. AJ Green, I mean, good history against Pittsburgh. This is a tough spot. I mean, Green's production has been absolutely massive the last 3 weeks. And obviously we know the targets are going to be there, but Pittsburgh's also been pretty damn good against wideouts.
Yeah, they kind of have a different vibe than the previous few years, which is why I'm shying away a little more. Obviously, it's AJ Green, so I'm down. But like a lot of these plays this week, I feel like I've been saying this to myself all week. Like, okay, like I'm okay with it. I get it, but I'm not in love. I'm not in love like Golden Tate against the Saints last week, or like some of these other plays, like Antonio Brown against the Chiefs, like. That's such an easier move than Antonio Brown against the Bengals,
Yeah, no, I agree. Like, I think because there's a tier lower than those guys, like I kind of like more just because, I plan on paying the running backs a little bit more. Like, I like Adam Thielen a lot here. If Stephon Diggs sits, if Diggs plays and actually plays to 100% health, I'm a little off Thielen. I still think Devontae Adams is in play here. At his price tags, I don't find him to be all that egregious. Jarvis Landry, I have a little bit of interest in with Devontae Parker still not practicing. He's going to get a lot of looks. The yardage hasn't really been there. The touchdowns have in the last 2, though. But you're going to get double-digit targets out of him here.
Yeah, if Kelvin's out or very limited, I'm looking at Funchess. I think he's a good play, and he's been under 5% on pretty much every week so far this year. So, even on FanDuel, I think he's a play. A little worried about the Green Bay receivers on FanDuel. I think they're much more viable on DK because they're going to get the targets like we saw last week. So, if one of them hits a touchdown and gets 10 to 12 targets, that'll certainly pay off. I like Pierre Garçon. I think he's a good play on pretty much all sites this week. He's relatively cheap. I think he's a guy that could do well against this Dallas secondary that's kind of been struggling this year, with Dallas not really getting a ton of pressure. So I think that's an interesting way to go for sure. Amendola, on FanDuel. It kind of gets ugly. I don't think Randall Cobb's in play based on what we saw last week.
I don't either. I love Cobb the week of the Dallas game, and then obviously last week was such a down game too. I just think there's that sweet spot with kind of those like target hogs of Thielen, Garçon, Landry, all top 10 in targets this year. So like I kind of see myself going there, and then like once we get lower, it's not exciting. Like I kind of look like you got the Jets guys, you have you have Jeremy Curley if you want to take a shot there, but I still kind of prefer, Robbie Anderson or Jermaine Kearse kind of as options. They're still cheap, so I mean, I still don't think you can really, overlook them at their prices.
Yeah, again, this is your weekly Mike Williams alert. Still not in play. Still very cheap. We don't need targets. We don't need receptions against this Denver defense. We need him to stay at like 1 catch for 7 yards. And then, next week it might be the week.
What about Eric Decker?
Looked good.
Yeah,
good. Looked like Eric Decker. Yep.
I don't want to overreact to one game, but caught 7 to 9 targets for 88 yards. Obviously, we know he's a guy who can be used in the red zone too. He's 5,100 on FanDuel. He's 43 on DK. Good matchup against the Browns. I'm okay with him and Rashard Matthews.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Decker's certainly in play, especially on on DK because of the targets he's getting. They're not really long bombs. They're just kind of those possession targets. but he's a touchdown machine. He's still in on a lot of the red zone plays. They just haven't been effective. So I could see Eric Decker against the Browns, type week. That's certainly in play. Good call.
So outside of that, are you looking at anyone else like Jags guys against Indy?
I like Lee. I think P. Rich is in play. Kind of. I don't love
make
it.
Me sick. Rich could be on a bye week, Russ.
So I did mention him last week, but he was on the bye week. I mentioned him as a bye week guy. Someone I smell something on this Rams passing game. I think you can definitely play Robert Woods, but he's not really a high upside guy. But I could see him getting 12 to 15 in that type of game.
I was kind of more looking at Cooper Kupp, actually.
Okay, yeah, okay. No, I'm fine with that as well. It's going to be one of those guys. It's just, it's so hard to know week to week who's going to be in the game plan because we've seen Woods have games, we've seen Kupp have games. So
I think, I think the only thing that gave me the slight advantage here for Kupp is that he's actually getting red zone targets. He's seen 8 red zone targets already this year. That's the same amount as Hopkins and Antonio Brown. And we've been on this all year, targeting those wide receiver 2s, wide receiver 3s against Arizona because Patrick Peterson just funnels everything down to them. So if that's the case, I know Peterson was banged up, left last week's game. That'd be one to keep an eye on. But Watkins is still not even really being used. So I'm in agreement there. I think there's some potential.
I want to move to tight end because I want to ask you a question. Unless you have any other receivers you want to mention.
I don't think so.
On FanDuel, Gronk at 8,500. Obviously, last week he was pretty much essential to placing well in a GPP. What are you thinking this week? Because really that's where I see the big difference in this slate. If he hits again, we just don't have guys who can match that right now. ASJ can get you 15, 13, but if Gronk goes for 25, it's just there's no play that can really match that right now,
Yeah, when you look at things, Atlanta doesn't really match up well with tight ends. They're 19th in DVOA. They're allowed a decent amount of fantasy points. I kind of like paying up for Gronk, but if you're paying up for Gronk, you're kind of limiting yourself to getting maybe one of the top tier wide receivers. But hell, there still are cheap options like Mark Ingram once again, 7,100. If you want to go that route, McCoy, Freeman, and not usually get that stud Bell, you can go back to Gronk this week and kind of have a similar lineup construction as last week because you did that. There were so many cheap options, so I like them. I'll get my exposure, but I'm kind of not also ruling out guys like Delaney or Jimmy Graham because they're in really good spots too.
And folks, Rob Gronkowski's $26 on Yahoo, so you just plug him in. You just plug him in. Zach Ertz, obviously a great play as well. He's 28 on Yahoo. But, in terms of the main slates on DK, like you mentioned, Jimmy Graham, you can play ASJ again. Delaney's fine. They're starting to use him in the run game every week, which I don't love. They've kind of been giving him those toss sweep things that get tackled behind the line of scrimmage. I don't know why they're doing that, but certainly still involved. Hunter Henry seems like a guy they finally accepted. All right, Antonio Gates, it's the youngins' time. We've seen it each of the last 3 weeks, so I'm pretty comfortable playing him at this stage.
I feel like this is a good tight end week. I think this is going to be a good tight end week. We have Gronk. We have ASJ up there. Delaney Walker gets a juicy matchup against the Browns, who've allowed the second most fantasy points to tight ends, and then you got Graham going up against the Giants, who have allowed the most. Baltimore's been sneaky bad against tight ends too. They've allowed 6 touchdowns already this year to tight ends. Kyle Rudolph sees bigger targets when Stephon Diggs is out. That's something to note. He's only 5,400 on FanDuel DraftKings. He's only 38. George Kittle going up against Dallas. He's seen 17 targets over the last 2 weeks. Even Evan Ingram, I'm not afraid of using in this spot here. I mean, he's clearly going to be a guy that Eli goes to. So those are probably the names that I'm sticking around. I like the Hunter Henry call too because Denver's been bottom 10 in fantasy points allowed to tight ends. So, he's clearly going to get some work. A good week. I think I'm going to be spreading out some of my shares.
Austin Hooper is a guy I'm going back to. Obviously didn't get the touchdown, but got a ton of targets with Sanu out. So if he's out again, certainly, in play on both the 0.5 PPR sites. It just stinks that he's not on, the main slate for DK. And you mentioned George Kittle, which was the other guy I was going to say, 3,600 on DK. 48 on FanDuel. So, yeah, if you want to go with a different lineup construction, if he can get you 10 to 12, you're living large there and pretty much can sustain a Gronkage if your other guys hit. So, yeah, no, it's a pretty good week. Like, things are turning around. Some of the young guys starting to emerge. I'm always worried about that Jimmy Graham, has to stay in a block game. But he's been doing better of late, so I'm not as worried,
No, he's a tilting guy to roster.
Yeah.
Because he's given me some promise over the last few weeks, like 8, 6, 11 targets. He's been a double-digit fantasy point scorer on DK. The price is starting to come down. Like, he's sucking me back in again. So, yeah, he's definitely a guy I could be pissed off, come basically 6 o'clock Eastern time.
Definitely. And that's pretty much it, right?
Yeah, I feel like that was a good 6 or 7 tight ends that are usable this week.
Yeah.
Moving on to defense.
Hardest position of the week for me, honestly.
Because you feel there's more options, or I've kind of liked defenses. Like last week's defense was ugh. And then we had this weird Saints blowout game. Baltimore obviously hit, but I mean, outside of that, I don't think there was a lot of other high-scoring ones. I
like Seattle. I like Jacksonville. I like the pay-up options, but what does that mean, in terms of my roster construction? Am I going to be wanting to sacrifice that much salary? I mean, Seattle's 5,500 on FanDuel. That's a lot for a defense, They need to get you 15, 20 points guaranteed. For plus the salary you're losing to enter other positions. It's like a tough sell. I still think they're in play. Jacksonville, same thing. I think eventually they get their points, but I don't know. It's a tough week for me because I see some good matchups, but I don't know. What's your take on defense this week?
I kind of like it. I think it's a good dart throw week with some of these guys. You and I, we talked Minnesota, we talked Buffalo on the salary exploitation pod. I like Minnesota at home against Baltimore. Baltimore's offense continues to really struggle. Buffalo, obviously, against a team that may or may not be with Winston. I still think even with Winston under center, they're very much in play. Ryan Fitzpatrick, we want to throw a little narrative there. Kind of like the Chargers this week is like a bare min punt. If Demaryius Thomas isn't 100%, Emmanuel Sanders already ruled out. Trevor Simeon's banged up. C.J. Anderson, Jamal Charles, it hasn't looked like a really good duo this year. I kind of like the Chargers a lot if you really are wanting the extra salary because 2,400 on DK is not bad. They're 41 on FanDuel. I'll take the risk there, and if they can get me 6, 8, and maybe anything else higher than that, I'd be fine with.
What about the Saints? 3K on DK, 3 straight weeks above 14 points, kind of playing some mediocre offenses, but they did shut down Cam, and they have some exciting young players in their secondary. Pretty interesting team, I will be honest. Their defense is very interesting to me.
they're starting to get pressure on the quarterbacks. 5-4 and 4 sacks over the last 3 games. So
4,500 against Brett Hundley. I mean, that's pretty interesting to me.
yeah, I think it's a good spread out week. Like I'm okay with Tennessee too, even though they're on the road. Cleveland's just been god awful, and the Titans I don't feel like are really that badly priced either. So like, I can, if you have the cash to use for Seahawks and Jags, I'm okay with it. I just think I'm going to need that 1,000 or 800 or 1,200. Like I think I'm going to need it, so I don't think I'm really using all that much of Seattle this week, especially on FanDuel. Jesus.
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I think that sums it up for me for defense though.
Mm-hmm.
So that's it for us. A pretty solid week 7. I think it's a little bit ugly, but I think we basically break through. It's kind of a pay up at running back week and a good tight end week, and definitely keep an eye on injuries. I think this is one of the most heavier injury weeks that we need to keep on because it's kind of opening doors for others, and especially in the wide receivers.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun week. I love the FanDuel and Yahoo slates much more because you get that high end game that's going to take that ownership that I both want and want to fade. So that's going to be nice. And then DK, is misery to me. I just look at that and it's just pure misery. It's gross.
No, it's not fun. It's a lot of not enticing plays, but it could be a mess, but it could be fun.
Certainly.
That's going to wrap it up for us. You can head on over to DaveFantasyCafe.com. Cheat Sheet's always up on Wednesday nights. Optimizer always running Tuesday throughout the week for every slate. If you like what we're doing on the pods, you can head on over. You can check them out at DaveFantasyCafe.com, but also throw us a subscription, throw us a thumbs up as well. And good luck in week 7.